Are you struggling to find mental health clinicians to work for your group practice or agency? Tired of posting job ads for your open roles only to have no response? Or worse, have the wrong individual apply for the role? What if you had a partner who understood both the intricate requirements and career arc of a mental health clinician and how to recruit them more efficiently to work for your organization? Sparrow Search Services is a behavioral health focused recruiting firm that utilizes their staff expertise as practicing mental health clinicians to source and engage other mental health clinicians who may be open to making a career upgrade. Reach out to Sparrow today via their website, sparrowsearchservices.com, to see how they can help you. Mention keyword Joe in your message to receive $500 off your first placement. Again, that's sparrowsearchservices.com and use promo code Joe to get that discount.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Andrew Burdett, and I'm one of the consultants with Practice of the Practice. I own a small hybrid group practice based out of Asheville, North Carolina, and we provide some in-person and mostly telehealth across the state of North Carolina and to some additional states as well. I really enjoy helping practice owners set up and manage a set of systems that work well for them both in efficiency and cost effectiveness. I also really like to help find ways to maximize how they currently work so that they can spend more time engaged in what they love to do outside of therapy and the therapy process. You can schedule a pre-consulting call with me at practiceofthepractice.com/apply, and I look forward to meeting with you sometime soon. Hello, and thanks for joining us. This is Andrew Burdett with another podcast takeover for Practice of the Practice. This is episode 927, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Sarah Mehta. Today, we're talking about the importance of niching down and kind of identifying who your ideal clients are, as well as the process of exiting insurance panels and switching to a private pay model. So, Sarah, thanks for being on the podcast. To start off, would you like to tell us a little bit about how you got into counseling as a career and kind of what that process looked like from undergrad or whatever it was into mental health?
Yes. So much like the most of the rest of my life, the decision to go into the counseling field was not, it was not where I thought I was going to end up. I went into undergrad with the plan to major in biology and was exploring like all the possible sciencey things I could do. So some of that involved kind of exploring like what it would be like to be a medical doctor, um, and doing like an internship around that abroad. I did not have a good time with that. I was miserable trying to like remember all the things and like use the anyway, it was a mess. And so I was like, well, if I'm not gonna do medicine, what is the next thing that sciencey people are supposed to do? And I was like, research. So I also did an internship at a lab, and that was also both the internships were really valuable experiences, but just realized they were not a good fit for me. And so I was approaching, my senior year of undergrad. And I was like, oh no. I was like, I am expected to do something with my life, and I have not figured out what that is. Like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And so I was minoring in psychology, and had taken a number of courses, and was really not only really interested in the material, but it just seemed like I excelled in that particular field. And so somehow my brain was like, oh, well, we kind of like people, and we like helping people, and we like psychology, and like that, counseling was kind of to my brain was like a way to engage in something interesting while also, being able to benefit other people. And so I applied to a couple of different programs and got into App State Probably because that was the last year they let you write an essay as opposed to being interviewed in person. I'm chuckling because I'm like, that really, I feel like, oh my gosh, that saved me. Uh, but yeah, got into App State and then, yeah, and then got my master's degree and there I was.
So it sounds like your educational journey is like a lot of people, to where you try out a couple different things, realize they don't fit very well, and then find a different path. And I'm sure that's helpful in terms of identifying niche and things like that, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So after graduation, what did you end up doing professionally? I know, having also gone to App State, they're very big on promoting agency settings and community mental health and the whole pay your dues, and are not always the biggest advocates of private practice and that being a space to end up in.
Um, so that was definitely the road I went down, was agency work. So from like 2017 to early 2020, I was in a community mental health setting. So I was doing a lot of intakes, a lot of assessment, um, some psychoeducational groups, also a significant amount of crisis work. And then in early 2020, transitioned to um, a program that did PHP, partial hospitalization, and IOP, intensive outpatient for young adults in addiction recovery. And I ran the women's IOP program there, the group program, from early 2020 till November of 2021, which is when I left that job and then started private practice.
How did you know that leaving the agency world and agency setting was something that was necessary for you to do?
Well, that's an interesting question. As you were saying that, my brain was like thinking like that you might less like, oh, like when did you know you were ready? And I was like, I did not. Like there was, I think there was a ready enough, and I think there were a lot of signs that kind of told me that like, hey, it's time to find something different or do something different. Uh, I can't remember what that exact moment is, but there were like kind of a series of things that really built up. Um, One of the biggest ones was being genuinely overwhelmed by the documentation requirements, the amount of notes, and also being able to get those done in a way that made sense to my brain and also get them done in a timely manner. That was like consuming a lot of my time, energy, and bandwidth. Um, the Really, I think in both settings, it's just that for me anyway, I didn't feel like I had a structure that really supported my nervous system. And I wouldn't have described it that way at the time, in the sense of relating it to the nervous system. But like looking back, I'm like, oh, yeah, like, there were like some mismatches for my brain and how it works, and my nervous system and how it works. And so that included things like, being in a group of like 20 or 25 people without a co-facilitator. That included not being able to get regular lunch breaks, uh, especially for later on, like driving an hour to get to work, and having to be up and functional in the morning when that's like not my prime. Yeah, I know you know that, Andrew. That is not my prime or peak time of performance. And that just feeling like I was on all the time. Like even when I left work, and kind of having that follow me home. I think my nervous system was certainly talking to me, and really showing me some really distinct signs, that yeah, it was time to do something different if I wanted to stay in the field.
A lot of that just sounds like many people's stories from agency and community mental health settings, or just institutional settings in general, about just that too much work to get done within the container of your work schedule, and then everything overflows, and it just leads to like a high level of burnout around serving the institution as well as serving clients, and probably serving too many clients as well.
Yes, that definitely, the way you describe that definitely resonates. with me, and I've talked to a lot of other people where that resonates as well. And I think it really is a prime example of kind of how the maybe intentions of uh, kind of how these places are or systems are built, and the impact are like totally different, and very often misaligned, and don't give enough support to uh, the people, aka the helpers, that are genuinely really trying to make a difference in the world. And I think unfortunately can end up doing um more harm than helping. And it's really sad. um I think, at least for me, to be able to see that, and knowing that this was probably not the original dream, or at least maybe that's me being a bit naive, I suppose. But it is like, for me, I'm like, yeah, my hope is that this was not how this was like dreamed to be, come into being. And yet, here we are.
So, thinking back, can you remember how you were starting to plan your exit from agency and strategize that? I know since you and I are pretty close, like it was definitely an ongoing conversation, and it wasn't necessarily a like wake up one day and aha, I'm exiting and I quit tomorrow and here's my 30 days. It was a longer process of transitioning and planning your stepping away from agency setting and stepping out. So, um, how did conceptualizing that exit plan come together?
um well, you were absolutely right. It was a ton of conversations with you about what that would look like, or what that could look like, or kind of steps to take. And I distinctly remember just like going back and forth like so much. Like, I would do one of the steps, right? Like, I would apply, maybe for my PLLC or something like that, and then like not touch it, like not touch anything related to the idea of transitioning out for like a week, or 2 weeks, or a month. Or and then I might like contact someone who reach out to someone about like, oh, like, how do I do this, or what does this look like, and then like not doing anything. So at least for me, looking back on it, I'm like, that's probably what helped my nervous system get through a lot of that, was like not doing it all at once. Because it just wasn't, with doing that and agency work at the same time. It was pretty overwhelming. Um, and I mean, the biggest steps I remember are like getting my PLC, and like doing the paperwork with the Secretary of State to get that figured out. uh, Getting started with like insurance credentialing and paneling, working on like profile content, and website content. I'm sure there's way more than that, but those were like some of the biggest pieces I remember tackling.
For those listeners out there, there's a lot of setup steps when it comes to setting up a business and setting up a therapy practice that can be done while you're still working elsewhere. And things like, setting up your PLLC, for example, in our state's gotten to be a little more efficient for our boards and things, but it's still a 4 to 6 week turnaround time, and insurance credentialing has only gotten astronomically longer if insurance is something you're planning to do. I realize we're talking going the other way here, so we'll get to that exit plan from insurance credentialing soon. But in terms of, I really like what you're talking about trying to do things in a pace that's manageable. And for those of you that are in agency settings and contemplating leaving, having something like this to kind of work on, to kind of know that you have this building up exit and kind of create that light for yourself at the end of the tunnel, can be also really helpful in mitigating some of those burnout symptoms as well. Um, Looking back, would you do anything differently in terms of how you went about things? Um, I do want to point out, I do remember you talking about, well, maybe if I just switch agencies, it'll be better. And I said, it's still going to be the same thing. If it's just going to be a different agency. So I don't know if that was another thing you might have, reconsidered or something like that looking back. But, just in general, like looking back on this process, what would you do differently if you had to do it again?
So I think, I mean, it's, gosh, hindsight is 2020. Unfortunately, I think it's sometimes unfortunate. And you know, I think, well, one of the things, that comes up for me is like, I think I was probably way more burned out than I realized. And even now I can feel some of my nervous system and some of my parts kind of cringing a little bit at being just honest about that. And yeah, I think I was more burned out than I realized. And so I think one thing I would have liked to do is, figure out a way to perhaps, I don't know, go down to part time, or do something where, figure out like a 4 day work week, like, doing, what is it? I guess the 10 hours, 4 days is like one of the things. But I think that's something that, looking back, like, could have helped. Even though I think I did manage to make this sustainable for my nervous system, I think it, could have benefited from even more space, and time to like specifically reflect on, okay, this is what I want this to look like, and this is, even things, right. I think I also really wish, that I would have, kind of leaned more on like my spirituality during that time too. Also, hindsight is 2020. It was nowhere near, like, my path was nowhere near as like clear and developed as it is now. So, but I think, that is something that I hadn't even thought about, but um using the things that I find really valuable now, like the moon cycles or those pieces to kind of help line up and move with those, with those cycles, and, using prayer and all of these other pieces, which, again, it's not that they weren't, so much not that they weren't available at the time, but just more that I didn't have as clear of a picture that those things were were accessible and important. And I mean, yeah, those are the two biggest things that come to mind. I think too, also, so, I did not know that I had an ADHD diagnosis, at the time of doing this. Um, and now it's looking like, autism is also potentially showing up to join the mix. We'll just throw a big party; it'll be great. But not knowing, either of those things at the time, um, it's like, well, I couldn't, what I know now, like, helps my brain kind of to get streamlined and to get organized, and like, oh, that my nervous system needs this or that. So I guess that's what I would offer to folks who, are maybe to looking to transition out, is like, at the get-go, being intentional about looking at, okay, what does my nervous system need? How can I integrate, like, whether it's my spirituality or my community? Because that was another thing too, is that I don't really feel like I, knew like a lot of other, private practice people at the time. I mean, I knew you. I think, yeah, you had gone into practice before, I had, but other than that, like, I didn't know a ton of people, and I think that's something I also wish I would have kind of given myself that gift, of, starting to kind of network and reach out and get to know people in the area. Um, and also doing that and having a full-time job. Oh my gosh, I can't
Yeah.
imagine.
No, you've touched on a couple really juicy things in here. So one is just, you did describe working in a very focused kind of setting in terms of like PHP setting. So, a step down from like inpatient care, but or residential, but very comparable and very focused around substance use and particularly women. So, not that that isn't niche, but it also sounds like it was a misaligned niche. And it also sounds like some of the burnout or contributing factors is realizing like not only is this not really a niche that maybe long term I want to work with, but it also just the whole setting doesn't line up with my how my nervous system and how it's differs from maybe mainstream things. And even if you're not neurodivergent, not every setting is really going to align with you as a person and how you want to work. So, neurodivergence or not, I think most people that have worked in agency settings can agree that it's just not a system set up to really support nervous systems in the first place. Um, and then another kind of last thing on there too, and networking comes up a whole bunch. At least in our area, you have people that work in agencies who you tend to know of if you find them on Facebook, but there isn't really a whole lot of social interaction and overlap among the agency community of therapists in our area versus the private practice setting therapists in our area, with some exception, but that just seems to be more of a norm. You're either in the private practice world or the agency world, and even socially, those don't tend to mix very well.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because that's something, you know, that I think is so just important for our field to have ongoing conversations with each other about. Um, at least in my experience, it feels like often there's this very big rift between private practice world and agency world, and there's all these I think my act brain is kind of going getting excited here about like all the narratives that are
Mhm.
present, that we, whether from experience or uh or assumptions, or whatever it might be, like these kind of stories that both sides, I mean myself included, from my own experience, like have about agency world and the stories they have about us, and like, oh, especially if you don't take insurance, are you becoming inaccessible, like all these pieces that I just wish as a whole that we could and would have more conversations about, um because I think it really hampers our ability to just connect with each other, and the hard work that we do, which I think is going to be hard no matter what setting you're in to some extent.
One thing too, we could talk a little bit about the rift that happens too of just deciding to be private pay versus insurance, because that's another area to where there's definitely some noticeable friction in our field. But so you left and started your own private practice, was insurance to kind of get started. And like everyone I know that takes insurance, there's an appreciation for making, to some degree, access to therapy more affordable for the people that have benefits that they can use. And then on the flip side of that is just a lot of, I think rage is probably a great way to put the emotion much of us feel that do take insurance, about how cumbersome and unnecessarily, how deliberately like dysfunctional the system really is around insurance. So when in your private practice journey did you kind of get a sense of like breaking up with insurance companies was something you wanted to do? Was there something that prompted it in particular, or just the overall frustration that many of us feel?
Yes. So I would have to look back through my journals, honestly, to like see if there was a specific aha moment. I mean, I don't really remember one, but in terms of time, so I started in November 2021 was when I opened my practice. And then I started getting off panels in December 2022. So it was about a year, and I wasn't like fully, for all of that time, like, because I know Blue Cross took like what was like 8 or 9 months, like for me to even get paneled, and so um, uh, but yeah, that being said, like time wise, it was about a year in. Um, and again, some of the pieces coming up, just documentation, which will always just be, that's just for me personally, that will always just be hard. And the medical necessity pieces were really just making it difficult for me. And I talked to some like colleagues, supervisors about this, of like, I would have a session that to me just felt, in a word, like magical, even though I knew it wasn't magic. I think a better word for that is like spiritual. Um, and then trying to put that into words, specific words that talk about like, illness and symptomology, and really just using any words to try and capture, like, for me, what I perceived as like a very spiritual exchange. Um, was becoming very difficult. I think it always had been difficult, but it was becoming even more difficult, like being on my own and doing that. Um, and also just not being paid well by the panels I am on, or I was on at the time. Sorry. Like it was it feel like I was getting really drained and then not being able to replenish like physically, mentally, emotionally, or financially, because I think that is important too. um and yeah, well, more on this later, but just also this idea for me that was becoming more and more. I was questioning more and more, like, oh, if someone is paying like $10 every time to see me, how much are they really able to invest? Like, how much do they have, and am I working harder than maybe a lot of the folks that I'm seeing? And I'm not saying that's true for everyone, but I think it was certainly that was one thing coming up too, is realizing that I was, even a year later, after being in my own, like having my own business, like that I was still being consistently drained and exhausted. And that was like not, I want to be very clear, insurance was not the only reason that was happening. It was also because I hadn't figured out a schedule that had worked well for me. I hadn't decided, like I hadn't really, for lack of a better word, like come to terms with my nervous system and
Yeah.
what it needed. So that, but insurance was definitely like a piece of that.
Yeah. Insurance isn't fun. That's a whole other like realm of different things. There's plenty of books with some choice words about insurance panels and things like that that refer to why people break up with them. So as far as your process of leaving insurance panels when you decided to like break up with them, how did that process go, and were there any surprises along the way?
So it was actually pretty smooth. I had a wonderful biller and billing team, Victoria Benson and her team, to help me out. And they basically, I reached out to them. I was like, hey, how do I do this? And had some conversations with Victoria about it. Um, and then her team reached out and said, hey, here, like for these specific panels, this is how you break up with them. Like, this is what you put in the letter. And so in terms of that, like I feel like I was so blessed to really just have the best like most clear instructions that I could possibly have, which for neurodivergent brain is super helpful. Like there weren't any like, uh nuances, so to speak, with that. It was just like your name, the date, like your CAQH number, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and so there weren't too many. Well, there were a couple. As I was saying that, I was like, nah, I wasn't. So there were a couple panels in particular. So one uh, took me off without telling me that they took me off, and that did catch me by surprise, because I was sending in claims for like a month thinking I was still paneled with this particular company, and I was not. So I was out, uh, conservatively, at least $1 or $2 grand, like from that particular transaction. And then there was another panel that, so most of the panels I was able to like get in touch with pretty easily, but there was another panel in particular that just was impossible to get a hold of. And so that was very frustrating. But those were really the only two, like, I would say, like, negative experiences. A lot of it was just time, and also talking with my clients about the change. Yeah, other than that, I think things went pretty smoothly.
How did you go about transitioning clients from insurance clients with in-network status to private pay status, and how did that transition go? Were you able to maintain some of the same clients in a private pay world? Did you end up losing some? Did you find yourself having to kind of compromise in terms of rates that you were willing to do to maintain the relationship? And was that something you were willing to negotiate with them? How did that go?
Um, So I actually kept at least a few folks. I'd have to look back in my intake queue calendar and see exactly who I kept. But I know there were folks that did stay with me. I had several that didn't, that ended up transitioning out to therapists who were part of their insurance network. And I did give folks a lot of notice. It was probably at least like a 2 or 3 month heads up, which was probably probably way too much. Um, and thinking, speaking of things to do differently, can't remember. I'm pretty sure I had all of those conversations in person, which I'm not saying don't have those conversations in person. Absolutely do. But I think one thing I probably would have done is to do an email, and give folks that like kind of chance to process on their own and read that and then bring that into session. That's what I've been doing this year as I am working towards changing several policies, changing my schedule, um, and raising my rates, and that has actually been really effective. And some of my clients have said, "Oh, it was real. I'm so glad like that you sent that, so that I had time to sit with it, and then we could talk about it." So I think for me, the important thing was just making sure that my clients felt seen and heard, and that they had the resources they needed, whether it was to continue with me or to transition to someone else.
As a therapist, I can tell you from experience that having the right EHR is an absolute lifeline. I recommend using therapy notes. They make billing, scheduling, note taking, telehealth, and e prescribe incredibly easy. Best of all, they offer live telephone support that's available 7 days a week. You don't have to take my word for it. Do your own research and see for yourself. Therapy Notes is the #1 highest rated EHR system available today, with a 4.9 out of 5 stars on trustpilot.com and on Google. All you have to do is click the link below or type promo code Joe on their website over at therapynotes.com and receive a special 2-month trial absolutely free. Again, that's therapynotes.com and use promo code Joe on the website. If you're coming from another EHR, Therapy Notes will also import your demographic data quick and easy at no cost, so you can get started right away. Trust me, don't waste any more of your time and try Therapy Notes. Just use promo code Joe at checkout.
So this next question we kind of wrote down, have an additional thought on. So what about having a specific niche has been helpful in terms of either doing private pay, but I also want to maybe add in preventing burnout because just from my own experience when I'm working with clients that aren't a good fit, like they're more draining than working with people that are good fits. And it's less about maybe the acuity of what's going on and more about are we matching up in how we approach doing the work or what we're looking to work on. So, how does having a specific niche help with the private pay thing and just overall help with the avoiding burnout?
I'm glad you added that second part because I think that is really important. I think, and I can't remember who told me this or who I heard it from, but this idea of like wanting to go into my week and to wake up and look at my calendar and feel excited about who is on the calendar for that day. And not like every single second of every day, right? Like excluding days where I'm like crabby or tired, or if like maybe there's a difficult conversation I'm going to have with someone, right? But that for me, like that's kind of what I try to keep in mind as I think about my niche and who I work well with. There's a in ACT, we talk a lot about like values alignment, and I think that alignment also really works well in terms of describing like the match or alignment in the therapeutic relationship. Um, I also think about niche, right? Like when we talk about it, I think there's like this assumption maybe that like, oh, everyone you work with like has to be in your niche. And for me, it's actually been helpful to have like a couple of people that are like not 100% in my niche, but also like step into other categories. Um, uh, Ones that I'm, still competent in, but it keeps for me anyway, keeps kind of a variety, and there's still solid alignment to work with. Couple of things too, I think, that have really been helpful in terms of so niching has really helped me to understand, like, oh, like I can speak the language of like my people. Um uh and and uh you know um I chuckle, but I think it's like true. I'm like, I'm not sure I work with anyone neurotypical. If I do, they're very tolerant of my metaphors and like the way that our sessions, kind of have this, can have this very like interesting kind of wavy, nonlinear path that kind of comes back around. Um, and so to me, I think part of that is because like of the copy I have on my website that like speaks to some of that. Like I think the first thing you see when you get on my page is a Nirvana quote, "Come as you are." Um, and so um as I'm talking, I'm like, wow, I'm not really sure I answered the question. Did I answer the question you were asking?
I think so. I mean, so if you had to categorize who's in your niche or who's kind of like niche adjacent that you enjoy working with, who's kind of in your umbrella of people you like to work with?
Um, so I work with a lot of adults who identify as neurodivergent, particularly as ADHD or autistic, and or who are like figuring this out like as adults. So not something they knew about, growing up, or not something that they got support with growing up because they didn't know it existed. I work with um, also with a ton of adult children of emotionally immature parents. And kind of as a result of that, many of the folks I work with really struggle with relationships in some kind of way. So whether that's like having a history of abusive relationships, or just relationship where needs weren't getting met, or not knowing what boundaries are, or struggling with like how to like translate what's in their brain to like into words to other people. um, Not all of my clients, but a lot of my clients have multiple intersecting identities in terms of being BIPOC or queer. I do end up working with a lot of women, and I'm not totally 100% sure like how that has happened or why that is. But lately I've also been, it's funny, have had some who identify as like cisgendered males um, kind of seek me out for support, because they have lost their way in some kind of way, whether that's like addiction, whether that's feeling lost in relationships, whether it's like, how do I navigate, being masculine in this time where, a lot of the world is like, crush the patriarchy. Right. Like, it's like, oh, um, yeah, that is, gosh, that's a thing. And how do we move with that? So, and I mean, that's, again, I think niche for me is something that I'm kind of planning on it continuing to evolve. So I don't think, that what I say now about what my niche is going to be like my quote forever niche. Um, you know, um, I think it, my hope is like as I evolve and change, like my niche will too. Something I'm realizing I didn't touch on niche wise, and this is like relatively new, but um, I know you and I have talked about like how the work we do is more spiritual than medical, and that's really starting to show up a lot more in my work as well. Um, uh, Even before we had that conversation, but noticing that there's a lot of folks that are really struggling with, it's like, yeah, how do I move in this modern world with this, with my nervous system? And then there's also, there's nature, there's, higher powers, and those aren't like, kind of naturally worked in to the world we live in anymore. And how do we figure that out? Like, can we still live a values aligned life in this kind of modern chaotic world? Is, I think, a question a lot of my clients are starting to uh, struggle with.
That kind of segues a bit to my next question about how does private pay align with your niche, or just maybe a niche in general, but specifically like your niche? How does private pay better fit into that?
So a couple of different things. So one big thing that has come up for me, personally, in a lot of my spiritual work, is this idea of sacred reciprocity, which I describe as kind of this mutual impact process. And so I have started to realize, like, oh, like when I go into a session with someone, and I know we talk, right? Like school talks about, like, oh, we're not these, blank slates. I don't know, like Freud or whoever, right? Like, kind of we're expected to be. And yet when we get into the field, I think a lot of the dynamics that we have, like, we kind of end up enacting that, right? It's like, oh, like our clients, drain, like, especially when we're burnt out, right? Like that very real sense of being like drained dry, uh, financially, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And so for me, private pay really is one way of many, to embody this idea, like, oh, when I show up in a room with someone, I'm showing up, like, by having, for example, this particular rate, like, I am already communicating that I have needs that need to be met, and that we are both adults, and that we are both invested in this relationship and both impacted by this relationship. And speaking of the long list of things I wish our field talked more about, that's one of them. Um, I think people get really scared sometimes about this idea, like, oh, that we are also impacted by our clients, and like that money is a part of that relationship, whether you're insurance, whether you're private pay, whether you're an agency world, whatever. So I think for me, it just brings that into a conversation in a way that I've never done with anything else, like with any other part of my career. Um, and again, going back to the work we're doing, as at least for me, as I see it so much more as spiritual and than medical, and that private pay, or really private practice, but I think especially private pay, allows you just more spaciousness, with that, instead of
I
having to constantly worry about, like, oh, do I check this box? Which diagnosis is this? Well, you're going to be this today because insurance won't pay otherwise.
I think one thing I want to really add in there is with third party payment, you're someone else is in the room. Someone else is involved in that process. And even if it's something that's working to serve the actual client with the insurance, like you're still there, kind of like you're saying about, well, I really have to categorize it this particular way just so it gets paid for. And then when things go haywire with insurance, which is going to happen if you haven't had that experience yet, just know that it will. Um, Private pay is a way to just kind of reduce the number of extra bits so you can get directly to what's going on back and forth. I guess is kind of one way I'm thinking about this as you're describing it.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I would agree. And it just I think it genuinely, just, and it's like weird. It kind of also, it feels like it does it automatically, like by virtue of being like cash pay as opposed to going through a third party. Of really, I see it as an invitation to invest differently in your mental health, uh, whatever that might be. Um, and yeah, I think it just, for so many reasons, which we probably cannot cover today. Um, uh, but yeah, I do really see it as different in that way.
So for those out there listening that want to are considering, do I do cash pay or private pay versus insurance, or are maybe on insurance and wanting to switch models, like what have you learned this year doing the private pay switch and experience that you want to share with others to make sure that they are aware of or consider as they contemplate their pay model?
Um, Gosh, there's so many things I can share, but I'm going to try to be specific here in that. So I know we've talked about networking, and that is something absolutely that does come way more into the picture when you are private pay as opposed to if you take insurance. Um, One thing especially I've learned is like being intentional about who you network with. Chances are you already know a ton of other therapists that take insurance that you trust, and that's great. Like that's you will have those people just like, Andrew, you're on my list of people where I'm like, hey, if I think this would be a good fit, it's like, oh, hey, check out Andrew. I know him really well. I trust him. A lot of folks probably know, group practice, right? People and owners that take insurance. And if like, the owner, it's like chances are you can also probably trust a lot of the clinicians, right? So all of that to say, being intentional about networking with other private pay people, especially like in your state or states that you're licensed in, who have either similar niches, or I would also say like it's really important to network with adjacent niches as well, like couples counseling or whatever that might be. And so I know for me that's been a huge learning curve, and I'm just now getting to a point where I'm like, oh, I think I kind of want to scale back and be more intentional about who I, talk to um, in that way. Um, Along those lines, making sure you have a community, making sure you have a support network, and not that like partners or peers are not good enough, but like I would say like a professional support network. So for me, I have been was involved in Janelle Crummey's private pay group. Highly recommend her. That was a great space for me to navigate some of these questions. And then I also joined Lean In, Make Bank with Tiffany McLean, and that has given me a support network. It really just enhanced my support network in a way I never could have dreamed of. So that you have people to talk to when you're going through all these things about like, oh, what should my rate be, or like, oh my gosh, I have so much guilt or shame about this particular aspect of my how I'm running my business, so that you can have those people to talk to, um, knowing that your practice is not going to stay the same. Like it will inherently change, one, because of going private pay, but even when you do go private pay, like even after that, they're going to be, oh my gosh, I cannot tell you the number of like, feels like variations that my practice has gone through, whether that's like with rates, hours, documentation, your website content, like, you know, that will change over time, and that's okay. Like that's supposed to happen, even if your nervous system is like, which mine still does, but, um, uh, and I think too, I cannot, these last two in particular feel really important. So setting your fee. And this also, I will say, has largely come from my participation in Lean In Make Bank, which again, I highly recommend because it's a program that talks so much about this. But that setting your fee can come from a lot of places, right? We can set it because of like we're in scarcity mindset. We can set it because we're like, oh, I want to be accessible or whatever it is. And so just at the end of the day, what I've come to understand about my fee is that it's not representative of my worth as a person. It's not necessarily representative or all encompassing of my clinical work or my education. It is what I need in order to get my needs met. And so being mindful about like, yeah, if there's stuff around money, old ties from, childhood, adulthood, wherever, like being sure that you have a space wherever that is to address that, because it is going to come up and it is going to show and it is going to change the relationship with your client. Sometimes not for the better if you're not aware that all of that stuff is in the room. And the second piece is just for me, I have come to a place where I'm like, I have got to build a practice that is sustainable for me. And not just sustainable, but like that allows me to thrive. Like, I think that was one of the things I realized kind of like when I transitioned into private practice at first, and even then, transitioning to private pay, I was still very much in agency mindset. I was still trying to conform unconsciously, at least initially, to like some of those expectations about like hours or documentation or things like that. And so for me right now, a sustainable practice where I can see myself thriving means I have Mondays and Fridays off for admin days. I see 3 people a day, three days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. My day doesn't start, like I don't start talking to people until 11 in the morning. And I quit talking to people at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. That's like kind of my time. And then using the admin days for like networking or CEs or developing courses, whatever that is. And setting a rate, which for me right now is $3.25 an hour, that is going to allow me to live my life in a way that is just nourishing for my nervous system rather than draining of it.
Cool. Well, thanks for being on. So, can I ask 2 final wrap-up questions? So, for people out there evaluating their niche or figuring out, what's your biggest takeaway if you had to sum it up in a sentence or 2? Like, what's your elevator pitch around niche and why it's important?
Like I know it, but like finding the words for it, like especially like a couple of words. Niche is important. I would say if you want to maintain your nervous system, like, and I don't just mean maintain, but like if you want your nervous system to thrive and you want your practice to thrive, that's why you need a niche. That, like, if you do not have one or both of those things are going to consistently be out of balance.
As far as private pay, any big takeaways you want to make sure people are aware of as they're thinking about possibly doing private pay?
Um, yeah, I mean, just again, just I cannot stress enough the importance of community, like having a group of people you can trust to talk about this with. Um, for me, it's especially like in my not just like my private practice, but spiritual practice, right? This idea of like, we have struggles and this is why we have community. Like, there are other people who have done this before you. You are not going to be the first person to do private pay. And also, like, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Like, find these people, talk to them, or find people who know other people. So that like you've got net uh, to kind of help hold you, because it's a big deal. I think to make any changes in your business, especially given what we've talked about kind of what is in our field. I think in particular about not only like the rifts between like agency work and private practice, but the rifts between like, do you take insurance, do you take, are you cash pay only, and kind of the responses you can get. And so um I think, yeah, especially having people in your corner who believe in you, who believe in the work you're doing and that it's important, and who can help kind of not only support you but challenge you on some of like the internal narratives that might come up. Whether that's like, oh my gosh, I'm making myself like unaccessible, or like this, like, oh, this sounds so great, but like I'll never be able to make that happen, or I have to do everything all at once. Like, whatever those are. um because I think, yeah, there's no way we do our best thinking on our own. At least I don't think I do. It always helps to have at least someone else, if not the more the better, to like look at things from a perspective, multiple perspective. Um, the only
I
other thing I
definitely want
can,
to jump in and
oh
sorry,
god,
go ahead.
I was just
I
gonna
was just
say,
gonna say I want to.
sorry, you go. I will shut up. Go ahead.
No, I just for the people out there listening, I do want to echo like having some people you can externally process things with is really important, and I think that just kind of speaks to our field and what we do too, where people come to externally process things with somebody like us. So anyway, final point, and definitely thank you for coming on.
Yes. And final point is, make sure speaking of processing, I would highly recommend that you have either a peer processing group or a supervisor. I do not care if you're like, oh, don't have my A anymore and don't need this. Yes, you do. We all do. So please be sure to have that person, because it feels like a whole different ball game when you don't have staff meetings anymore. Right. Well, I mean, I guess between you and you, right? Like you're the staff, you're the boss, and you're the employee. So keeping that in mind too. And I think that there's probably so much more, but that is what my brain has arrived at currently.
Well, cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on to talk about just the significance of niche as well as private pay and that whole transition there. It's been a pleasure to have you. What's the name of your practice if people are going to go searching for you?
Yes. Oh yeah. I guess sorry. I'm just like chuckling. I'm like, oh yeah, of course that's important. My practice is Mountain Soul Counseling, PLLC. I'm located in Silva. I offer both in-person and telehealth, and I'm happy to chat with folks, yeah, about any questions they have about going private pay or resources. So yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Thanks for tuning in if you made it this far, and thanks for listening. And hope everyone has a good rest of their week. Thanks for tuning in and listening to my podcast takeover for Practice with Practice. If you made it this far, thank you very much. If you'd like to talk more about our topic today and find out more info from our guests, please check out the episode description below. And if you're interested in learning about working with me, head over to practiceofthepractice.com/apply and schedule a pre-consulting call. I'll look forward to working with you sometime soon. Thanks.
You know, we also couldn't do this show without amazing sponsors like Therapy Notes. Therapy Notes is the best electronic health records out there. They will help you switch over from your current EHR. They also give you 2 months for free or just money off if you use promo code Joe at checkout. They are phenomenal. They help with automated billing. It's going to make it easier to outsource your billing. So many reasons to switch to Therapy Notes. Just head on over to therapynotes.com, read about it, and at checkout, just use promo code Joe. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.